With God, we have an unchanging standard. We have a divine judgment. They appeal to sort of empathy or the heart. Obviously, we would agree with the idea of the human conscience. God has actually written the moral law on the human heart, reference Romans 2:14-15. And human dignity is going to be a real problem if they approach it from a naturalistic perspective on how exactly they're going to empirically ground the dignity of humanity. Now, from us as Orthodox Christians, we believe in theosis, and the whole purpose of salvation is to become more like Christ.
The important issue here is grounding morality. What is it ultimately grounded in? If it's completely subjective and completely made up based on the whims of the times, the trends, what's popular demand, majority rules, etc., the moral position could change. Something could be immoral last year and be completely moral this year based on that standard.
I'm not going to tolerate that.
Dude, you're rude.
I'm not rage quit. I'm not rage quitting.
That was definitely a rage quit.
Definitely.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
This evening, we are hosting secularism versus Christianity. And the question is, can we ground morality without God?
I definitely believe that you can ground morality without religion, without God. And I think I can make this debate short by just pointing out that we have done it throughout all of human history. If you look back throughout time, you can see that every society has had a set of morals, regardless of their religion in that culture.
Thank you. Godless engineer, to you.
All right. I hope y'all don't mind, but I wrote something up that probably will take about 3 minutes to get through. So morality is better grounded without God than with God. As far back as Aristotle, we have recognized that human beings are inherently social. And so that is why I feel that morality is better grounded without God.
Thank you. David, to you.
So the premise of tonight's debate is a grounding for morality without God. So our opponents this evening are on the affirmative side of this position, and they're going to make an objective case, which is going to be difficult based on their starting premises. And so what does grounding mean? Grounding means providing universality in regard to the application of whether it be epistemology, knowledge, and truth, in this case, morality, the necessity for it, and the authority of it. And so morality must come from something that's unchanging and transcends the material world itself, given it's, if they have evolutionary presuppositions, it's ever changing. And that would also include the perceived facts and truths that we derive from inductive empirical methods. So a non-theistic moral framework, if they're coming at it from a naturalistic perspective, I appreciate my opponent referencing Kant, because he just described that as a secular foundation for morality, when Kant's deontological argument was actually his apologetic for the existence of God. So a little bit ironic there. But their non-theistic approach to grounding morality is going to have a few difficulties this evening. One is going to be avoiding relativism. So how exactly they ground something outside of their own subjective preferences is going to be difficult, because if they appeal to their own subjective preferences, we're already going to see that they're going to concede the debate, because therefore, if it's just based on their subjective preferences, I have my own subjective preferences, and then essentially it's a draw. But given the law, the rules of debate and logical premises, they would actually lose the debate. So relativism, subjectivity, and establishing a sort of moral obligation. So if they appeal to something like empathy, that's going to be very difficult to actually make a affirmative argument for why it is morally obligated for people to act in certain ways. And so our opponent this evening has already failed to understand the is-ought, what's often referred to as the Hume's guillotine, and that you can use empiricism or inductive methods and describe a lot of ises but they're going to have a very difficult time getting to the point where they can describe an ought. And so they only have a few ways to go. They can talk about morality being socially constructed, which is going to then fall into relativism and subjectivity, which would then concede the point of grounding something, which again refers to universality and necessity. Or they can go a utilitarian route, which would probably be their best approach. However, utilitarianism is going to be subject to the same problems. We're going to see the ambiguity of happiness. So if they're going to root morality in the happiness of the greatest number, how do we exactly define happiness? How do we quantify happiness, especially if they're using an inductive empirical method? And how are they going to deal with various examples in which a minority group has a particular opinion, and if they were to wipe them out, put them in slavery, or persecute them, that it may benefit the majority? Clearly, that would be an immoral act, even, I assume, based on their own standards. So there's going to be a lot of problems if they go the evolutionary approach, because obviously that is going to be dubious due to the ever-changing nature of material reality. Utilitarian approach is going to be subject to the same relativistic subjective problems, and therefore morality can only be grounded in the existence of God, because one, it has to be transcendent, and a second, it has to be absolute. So God's goodness is rooted in his nature, which we understand. Jim Bob and I are both Orthodox Christians, and so it has to do with an engagement with his energies. And that leads to the establishment of a moral objectivity. So I assume their rhetorical points tonight is going to try to highlight the dubious, what they perceive as the dubious nature between some of the perceived atrocities on their end in the Old Testament versus the New Testament, which we would already say that we believe in a progressive revelation in which the first covenant is superseded by the second covenant of Jesus Christ. And Jim Bob, I'm sure, will talk a little bit more about how God is clarifying a moral law due to the fall. So if we talk about polygamy, for example, Adam and Eve as the ideal standard, creation falls, and we have various saints, even within the church. You could look at David or Solomon having multiple wives. The reason why this isn't problematic at a moral standpoint is because revelation is progressively being revealed. And so God is not dealing with the ideal. He is dealing with a cultural context in which the people found themselves in a fallen world. And so with God, we have an unchanging standard. We have a divine judgment. And if they appeal to sort of empathy or the heart, obviously we would agree with the idea of the human conscience. God has actually written the moral law on the human heart, reference Romans 2:14-15. And human dignity is going to be a real problem if they approach it from a naturalistic perspective on how exactly they're going to empirically ground the dignity of humanity. Now, from us as Orthodox Christians, we believe in theosis, and the whole purpose of salvation is to become more like Christ, which is fulfilling the telos of human creation itself. So the eternal, unchanging nature of morality in God, the transcendence of culture and subjectivity, if morality is rooted in God, and the authoritative and inherently goodness of God is going to be one of the reasons why morality actually cannot be grounded in a philosophical perspective without God.
Thank you. Can you breathe now? That was a lot. That was a lot. No shame there. Jim Bob, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Okay, so morality refers to how we categorize human action, maybe thought, as either good or evil. Morality doesn't refer to how useful an action or a thought is. Notice that. Now, tonight we'll probably get a lot of usefulness, a lot of pragmatism, a lot of utilitarianism from our opponents, but that doesn't tell us what direction we should take this, right? What is the goal ultimately? Because morality refers to the prescribed behavior of beings, it's logical to assume the standard for a moral behavior is also a being. We do not model our behaviors after inanimate objects, and most of us, at least for now, don't model our behavior after animals in nature. The question tonight is whether or not the secular view, our opponents, can ground morality. The question is not whether or not the atheist is disgusted by certain things biblically or extra biblically. What you will likely hear from our opponents tonight is a list of complaints regarding human behavior, both past and present, including biblical events or current policies. In the same breath, we'll likely hear that morality is completely subjective. And as my opponent said tonight in his opener, the secular view, their moral standard isn't at the whims of a deity, but rather the whims of the trends of the times, which means any given time, any given era, any given behavior you're going to point to, it was the trend of the times. How could it possibly be immoral from that system? It can't be. You can't use the present day cultural narrative of what's good, what's bad, based on arbitrary cultural references and let's say conventions, and use that standard to go back into time. They probably will do this biblically and judge the past, because by their own standards, they're equal. They're on par. They're the same thing. Now, the question is, why is X immoral? So notice tonight, whatever they say is immoral, no matter how aggressive, how emotional it is, how graphic it is. Notice that the question isn't whether or not they think it's gross or think it's bad. The question is, why ultimately is it wrong? Not, I don't like it, like I don't like black licorice. Why is it actually wrong regardless of your preferences? Now, keep in mind, it's actually likely today that my opponents don't even agree on their moral standards, right? One might take a different approach on the current social issues, for instance, than the other. Well, who gets to win in that argument? Secularism versus secularism. I suppose we'll probably hear some secularism versus secularism tonight. With that said, the important issue here is grounding morality. What is it ultimately grounded in? If it's completely subjective and completely made up based on the whims of the times, the trends, what's popular demand, majority rules, etc., the moral statement, the moral position could change. Something could be immoral last year and be completely moral this year based on that standard. So with that, I would love to hear from my opponents presenting an objective standard for morality tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen. And before I open the floor, I just want to send a quick shout out and an update for everybody. Everybody is plugged in and dual streaming off of here, so I will see your super chats and so on and so forth. I will display them below the screen as they are debating. And again, anything 20 and up, we will refer to as questions later going forward. The floor is open, gentlemen.
A behavior that God isn't in charge of. He just knows what will happen before it does.
What's the argument? Please tell me the argument with premises that states that an all-knowing God removes the possibility of free will, please. Two premises and a conclusion, please.
If he knows what's going to happen before it happens, that means it's predetermined.
What? If he knows what's going to happen before it happens, it's determined?
It's predetermined, yes. He has
No,
foreknowledge of it.
How does that remove our ability to choose what's going to happen?
If something is predetermined, you don't have any choice in the matter.
So, okay, so you're saying God can't removes our ability to choose in the temporal.
If he knows everything before it happens, then yes, he has removed your ability to make it something other than what he knows will happen.
And so you're making an argument against the entirety of Christian theology of being made in the image of God and having free will. God has.
Well, I don't know if you want to interpret it that way. I guess that you can, but that's not what I was doing. I was let me ask you guys having free will.
Right. Let me ask this. If God knows the future, right? Like God is omniscient. He knows everything, correct?
Of course, by definition.
Okay. Does God know what choice you're going to make?
In some sense.
In some sense?
We still have
confused.
We still have free will, in which that's why we're judged by sin. It gets back to the whole point of morality. And if you disagree with free will,
so God doesn't know what you're going to choose.
Big guy, let me finish. So the whole point.
Sorry,
of
there's a lag on my end.
There he goes again. Man, your mouth just keeps moving. The whole point of morality is something can only be moral or immoral if we have free will to choose. So you've already conceded that there isn't free will in a deterministic, materialistic world. Therefore, you really can't even make a moral argument because you don't have free will to choose. Flow state trying to argue that God's omniscience is somehow limiting our free will is totally ridiculous and violates the entire history of Christian theology.
And also, to claim that you are responsible for your sins, even though you are as God created you to be, is damn near blasphemous.
No, that's a straw man.
Hold on. My question hasn't been answered yet at all. So I was just trying to lay the groundwork here. Like, you think that God is omniscient, but at the same time, God doesn't know what you will choose because you have free will?
Do what?
So I asked, does God know what you're going to choose?
So this has to, again, deals with a difficult understanding that God is outside history. He's outside space and time. So he already understands the beginning of the end of entire creation. So every decision that I've already made is already seen. If you're outside time and space, you've already seen the decisions that are made.
Right, so he knows what decision you're going to make.
My free will
but we're inside of it.
Exactly, and that's why we have free will.
Secondary cause. That's a secondary cause.
Right. Okay. So
I wasn't helping you.
You just did because you're totally ignorant.
We're inside space and time. We operate according to space and time. So if he knows what we're going to do within space and time, it's fixed here.
No, it's not fixed. We have free will.
Sort of like God's law didn't change either, right?
Okay,
like,
so
you guys can't just redefine words.
Do you understand that if you're arguing that we don't have free will under Christianity, and you also argue you don't have free will under your view, you don't have access to the knowledge anyway.
You do under my view.
How is it you have free will under your view?
Because I don't think I don't think that God has prescripted my life.
Do you know that knowing and causing are two different things, though?
He doesn't.
John?
He has no idea.
I do understand that knowing and causing are two different things.
Secondary causes?
If you know the outcome, that means that it is.
I'm not going to answer a question.
What are secondary causes?
I asked John, is there a difference between knowledge and
I'm not answering your question.
Why?
Because y'all still have not answered my question. I asked you a question first. I've tried to do my best to answer your questions when you pose them to me.
Dude, I'm answering your question because I'm okay. Forget answering questioning you. Sorry.
Yeah, you don't have to answer Jim Bob because he doesn't answer ours.
Right, but not knowing something.
No. I'm just trying to get an answer to my question. Yes or no? Does God know your decisions, and is He omniscient?
Yes, and knowing isn't causing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying that God causes it. I'm just asking you if He knows what decision you're going to make.
You granted free will.
That. Yes, emphatically.
There's only two options. Engineer, there's only two options. There's only two options, dude. Either God causes our choices because He already knows them and it's determined, or God knows and we have some cause in the matter. So if you understand the distinction that knowing isn't causing, right?
I haven't even made my argument yet. Like you're trying to jump ahead.
Argument for the grounding of morality either.
No, that's neither here nor there. So my point. If God knows what decision you're going to make, before you make the decision, is there a chance that you can change that and prove God wrong?
That's a category error. Like
how is that a category error?
Because
if you say that you have free will, then you can change. You can change your decision at a whim, right?
You're asserting that, but you're assuming God's existence, His knowledge, is somehow inside our temporal space-time stage, right?
No, we're just assuming that we are.
You're saying God has knowledge, and He's testing us to see if we can go against His knowledge of what's going to happen. The question isn't whether or not He knows. Again, the distinction is whether or not knowledge is equal to cause. Is knowledge equal to cause?
It's not equal to cause, but it does rely on knowledge cannot be had if the end is variable. A prerequisite is a fixed outcome. It's not causal, but it is a prerequisite to knowing the end.
Again,
you can't know how the movie's going to end if the movie hasn't been established.
But if you're outside space and time, you can.
We're not.
Exactly. We have free will. Thank you.
We're within it.
Thank you. Again, you just explained our category difference here, and you're still not understanding.
So we got to move. What you're saying is literally no amount of logic applies to God. You can say literally anything, and God's outside of space and time and understanding. You cannot understand God.
Of course we.
You have that. You literally just gave yourself a pass to have no foundation for anything at all.
Wait, you're saying God exists outside? God's not constrained by time, space, and matter. Therefore, we can't know anything about God. Is that your argument?
That means that you could say anything.
I asked you, is your argument?
God, I'm answering it. I'm answering it. By not holding God to any sort of standard of logic, even within itself. Even not being self-contradicting, you basically exempt yourself from any sort of standard at all. God could say literally anything. He could say that He's one God and three gods at the same time, which He does.
Interesting.
And you're good with that.
So wait a second. You're saying God? It only makes sense that God exists the way He does if He's subject to another God called other laws, like logic or something. Is that what you're saying?
if we are to understand God, which I assume that that's the purpose of religion, right? To understand God,
To know God and participate.
to know God, right? Do you feel like you know him better knowing that he's outside space and time and all that stuff, so he doesn't have to make sense?
Well, I mean, I think it's a logical necessity that God isn't bound by creation, because we have a creation-creator distinction. If you don't have a creator-creation distinction, by the way, you guys aren't theists, but if we were arguing against theists and you guys said the creation is God, this would be incoherent. So we understand God through revelation, but also through our faculties. For you to appeal to free will and you not to, godless engineer, for you, Taylor, to appeal to free will means there's a being, there's a personhood there that's making choices that's not identical to your mechanism unfolding, right? Your body doesn't fully control your choices, right? That's your view, Taylor, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that means there's a being that's not identical to the mechanism. Now you've necessitated something supernatural in your view, or metaphysical, immaterial, let's say, so we don't trigger, right, people who don't like the word supernatural. Now, just like morality, by the way, morality doesn't fit either of your paradigms. There's, like I said, I asked John, if his kid asked where is morality, from his empirical dogmatic perspective, he can't tell you. He can't tell us where.
That's a straw man right there.
What are you talking about? It's consistent with his paradigm. What are you talking about? It's a straw man.
What, that logic is tangible, or that morality is tangible?
An empiricist, a naturalist, has no justification to believe things that exist. Believe things exist if they can't be measured empirically.
Can you show me your sex drive?
What are you talking about?
It's a comparable biological instinct.
A sex drive?
Yeah, your sex drive is
I don't take a physicalist. I don't take a physicalist standard, dude. Do you understand what internal critique is?
He doesn't.
I do.
Either.
I do.
I'm not arguing from my paradigm.
You're trying to carry the straw man through.
Taylor, I accept metaphysical and immaterial concepts have a different ontology than a tree. Your friend, Godless here, doesn't. I'm saying to even argue morality from Godless's position is already outside of his paradigm.
Yep.
You can't find morality as a thing.
I think morality is an emergent property of a complex central nervous system.
Right, which is relativistic, because that means it's evolutionary based, and the precepts for survivability are different amongst different groups and based on the environments they inhabit. For example, lying could be something that would include the survivability of a certain group, though I suppose you would say that continually lying is actually immoral. So the entire basis, again, for your grounding, you've lost the debate. It's subjective and it's relativistic.
Do all groups have the same emergent?
Yours is absolutely changing and subjective.
Do all the John, just from your view, are all emergent properties called morality like the same? I don't know what you would call it, because you'd have to reduce it to physical, right? Or you're not reducing it to physical.
Can you guys try to establish again how your morality is not subjective?
Hold on, let
I want to know, Godless.
This
is a good faith question for Godless. It's not a gotcha. I want to know, when you say emergent property, morality is an emergent property. Do you think all concepts that aren't identical to matter are emergent properties, like a mind itself? Do you think a mind is an emergent property of the brain, or is it identical to the brain?
I think it's an emergent property of the brain. And I don't think that any of your questions are in good faith, like, whatsoever.
And they're not relevant. They're not relevant to grounding morality either.
They are relevant. He just said morality is an emergent property. I want to see where else he's categorizing morality, because if truth is an emergent property and making a statement about morality, which this debate is about, reduces truth claims to emergent property, everything DPH just said completely annihilates Godless Engineer's paradigm. Why? Because it's all relativistic, because each mechanism called a human being with a different brain produces a different emergent property. That means different Oprah Winfrey truths. Game over.
You have different views.
Stop.
You are.
Hold on. Flow State, you started talking first, then John, and then David, if you had something to add, that's fine.
So the Ortho Bros are sitting here trying to claim that their morality is unchanging and objective, but it's absolutely neither of them. Neither of them. Could you please establish how it meets the definition of either of those words without changing the definition of the word?
If we're using the term morality there's no use in even using the term morality if it's not referring to a law based on how we ought to behave. If it's the case that what you're referring to as morality is merely a bunch of preferences that change over time, just to use the word preferences, then you're consistent.
We can use your definition of morality that you used at the beginning, which is a standard of right and wrong behaviors.
Objective. You
Well,
guys
I
have
want to
already
hand it.
He
I wanna
did
hand it back-
not say objective in his opening statement.
I want to hand it back to John.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't listening to anything they were saying.
That's okay. If you started
Good
speaking
debater.
earlier, so I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to kick back in.
Tell us
Yeah, I
about
mean, I don't
PvP.
have anything to say. They seem to. It seems to me like they want to force this whole absolute or objective sort of standpoint onto my subjective moral foundation, but I don't even think they have the objective or absolute moral foundation they claim to have. So
They don't.
it just
They for sure don't.
seems like a giant pissing contest at this point. to me.
Even look, the title of the debate is "Can we ground morality with God?" Let's say we didn't ground
without
morality
God.
without God. Let's say we didn't. The question still stands: Can you ground morality without God?
Yes, it's grounded
Yes,
in negative
right.
rights.
Negative rights.
And
Let's get into
I
that.
ground it differently than he does.
First
Great.
of
What's
all,
the negative
hold
right?
on. We can go down that route. I can do that. But first, I want to hear you explain again how your morality is unchanging.
God is the standard for morality. He's a being, uncreated, unchanging. Why?
How do you?
Listen?
How do I come into the knowledge of God, the being?
I'm going
First
to
of
give
all,
this
I already-
5 more minutes, and then we're going to go into
I
closing
already
statements.
established, and you agreed that if morality exists and it refers to the standard by which we ought and ought not do things, that it necessitates a being. Now, the only question from your view is it an
Necessitates two of
absolute
them.
being? Is it an absolute being or just two humans? In your view, it's two humans. If you'd like to take the approach that your grounding for morality is just two humans, please, let's by all means do it. But if God existed and he was the ultimate uncreated source of all morality, all goodness, and all badness and evil was a privation of that, right? Your argument falls apart against God, right? It doesn't work to argue against objective morality
Right,
if it's
but
grounded
you
in
can't
God.
demonstrate that is the case. You can't demonstrate God.
Yeah, we actually already did. We
We
made
could.
a transcendental
You
argument.
demonstrated
It's
God.
not-
I can demonstrate God through a logical argument. You want to hear it?
Exactly. We can use logic and demonstrate a logical, coherent argument, as we've already talked about. There's only two theories of truth: coherency, which
the
is going to be.
fact-
Are you
The
gonna let
fact
me
that
talk, sweetheart?
the fact that I'm
Sweetheart.
that there's people.
Easy.
The fact that we're even having this
Stop.
conversation
Go ahead,
demonstrates
Flo.
that you can't deny it.
Okay, listen. In this conversation about morality, are you not
Mhm.
assuming there's a truth to the matter?
Sure.
Okay.
That's
is the
a
truth of the matter?
metaphysical
Is the
concept.
truth of the matter absolute, metaphysical, immaterial?
Depends on what matter you're talking about. Truth is the
Is-
quality of a claim.
Okay. The quality of the claim. Are qualities of the claim, if you say the quality of the claim is called true as opposed to false, is it absolutely the case that it's true?
They're so dumb. They're both.
If something is
Shut your wife up. She's not in this debate.
Okay, stop it. If
Don't get
Or
frustrated,
was
don't get in your
that a man?
fifis.
Or is that a man?
Come on out
Go
of
ahead.
your fifis.
You know, I feel like I've tolerated
rude.
this long enough. I'm not going to tolerate that.
Rage quit. Dude, you're rude.
I'm not rage quitting.
Oh,
I'm
did
not
we
rage
violate
quitting.
your
I'm just
subjective
not
morality?
allowing
Dumb, you little
to-
fuck.
All right, gentlemen, let's move into.
I'm gonna
Stop
let
it.
my wife talk shit, right? But I'm gonna be
Boys.
like, you fucking unbelievable.
All right, shout out to everybody. We lost one. That was definitely a rage quit.
Definitely.
All right. We were so close to the end. So
Yeah, you
close to
blame
the
Victor.
end.
Talk about rude. Talk about rude. Let your wife insult the guest on the panel that
I
agreed to
don't
do a
think that
debate
was
with this guy.
intentional.
I don't give a shit. He was talking to his wife multiple times throughout the debate. Okay. Of course, it's intentional.
All right, gentlemen. Flow State, since you're uneven now, if you want to go ahead and start with your closing statements.
Sure. For my closing statements, I think it's obvious here that I throttled the Ortho Bros. That they couldn't prove any of their claims that their morality is objective, that it's unchanging. In fact, despite insisting it was, the opposite is obvious. And as per the definition of morality and grounding, nothing necessitates religion nor God. We can see that through history, as we can see that logically. I yield.
Great, I'll go.
Damn.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't realize. I was just ready to bite.
No, go ahead, Jim Bob.
David, if you want to let Jim,
Yeah, I
that's
want
fine.
Jim Bob to go, and I'll close.
Yeah. So what we saw tonight is a demonstration, which DPH and I both knew ahead of time because we talked about it, that these two wouldn't even agree on their moral standards, demonstrating there is no grounding. Second of all, we knew ahead of time they wouldn't understand what grounding is. Grounding isn't just some assertion and latching your morality onto something subjective like an opinion or the trends of the times. Further, he just said morality, is not something that be grounded in God. There's nothing that necessitates God. To say such a claim is to assume absolute truth exists, which necessitates God, by the way. If this argument actually was allowed to spill over into truth, which I believe truth and morality are related, you can't argue morality without arguing truth. Both Slow State and his partner. And his partner's partner, they couldn't tell me what the absolute standard for truth is, let alone morality. Now, if their system, this is my closing statement. Is there any duct tape you have in your room? So if they held their standard against morality, against truth, it would fall apart, and that's the whole point of the debate. Objectively grounding something means you're attaching to something, or you're given an account for the existence of in something that's unchanging. That's always the case, right? That's always true. That's always fixed in that way. Flow State admitted that morality refers to ought claims about us. He admitted you can't get an ought claim from a rock or a tree. He said, well, it does necessitate beings, just two. So that's a majority, right? So any two people who decide something's moral, it's moral. Now, notice how if you use that system and you go back in time in the Bible, anything you think is abhorrent, shut up, dude. It's my closing statement.
Oh, State, you know better. Come on now.
If that's true, there's nothing they can point to in the Bible, even if we granted their grotesque interpretation of things happening in the Bible. There's nothing they could say. Why? All you need is two or more people agreeing that grape is right, and it has to be right. Notice how I asked John, can something be immoral at 5 p.m. and immoral at 5:01? He said yes. That's the end of the debate. That means it's not grounded in anything but your thoughts that can change moment to moment to moment. Now, notice when I pushed the time limit further down and said, can it be 5 o'clock p.m. and X is immoral, but at 5 and 5 seconds it's changing? He has to say yes, right, from that standard. The point is, David Patrick, Harry, and I have successfully demonstrated, mostly from us not even talking, by them talking, that their own standard falls apart, totally arbitrary, ever-changing, emergent property, changing from one plane to the next, majority rules. It doesn't matter. It's a free-for-all. If you can get people to agree with you that cutting off a head and dumping it down a pyramid is morally good, they have to agree that it is, given the times. Furthermore, and finally, that ultimately any moral claims you have, including subjective morality, which doesn't make sense, just call it preferences, assumes a truth standard, an epistemic standard. If these guys even went into the pool with us on epistemology, it would have been even more bloody than it was today. So, God bless us for not taking out all the knives. With that, thanks for having me. I appreciate the debate. It's always fun, Flow State. I appreciate you too, guys.
David, to you.
So the premise of tonight's debate was grounding morality without God. This requires, as we said, universality, necessity, and authority. What we saw tonight was two individuals who didn't even know what was going on in the debate. They had no idea what the premise was all about, and they never even made an absolute objective claim. What they did was refer to their fifis and their preferences. They want to say that, is God subject to logic? We've already made a transcendental argument for categories like logic, the laws of language, number theory, all this different stuff are non-physical, which of course they abide by. And I'd be curious, we didn't have time because Big Boy already quit. Is 2 + 2 = 4? Is that always and eternally true? Now, from their own worldview of evolutionary naturalism, they would say, well, it is right now, but it could change in the future. We don't believe that. We believe that these metaphysical attributes, these transcendental objects, these are unchanging, and it requires then a transcendent entity to ground these. We did not come here to make an argument just for Christianity, though we are both Orthodox Christians, and that could certainly be a debate of another premise. What we did was make an argument for the existence of a God, a transcendent entity, which can be grounded these things in. So what we saw tonight was relativism, subjectivism, and inability to articulate any sort of objective standard. We saw a difference between the two secular moralities presented by Flow State and Godless Engineer. What we saw was an amateur Reddit tier attempt to talk about, if God real, why bad thing happened. This is embarrassing. We are adults. It should be a little bit more sophisticated than that. I thought at least they would refer to some of the more sophisticated atheistic arguments in the history of philosophy, but of course they're not well read enough to even understand that. This was a trouncing. This was an absolute bloodbath. Anybody that has a IQ above room temperature would be able to visually see that tonight. So we made an appeal to God through revelation, because if there isn't a transcendent entity, and again, this is not exclusive, revelation based in various religions is not exclusive to Christianity. Although, why is that necessary is because it appeals to something that enters into the moral or the material condition. As Jim Bob highlighted, if you're just using naturalism and inductive methods, you can't create you can talk about what is, but you can't talk about what you ought to do. This is the human guillotine, who he himself was an atheist, but at least, unlike our opponents tonight, was philosophically consistent. So unfortunately, one of the debaters already rage quit. We conclusively demonstrated that there is no objective standard without some type of transcendent entity. Now, of course, for us, that is the Holy Trinity. What we saw tonight was an embarrassment, and I wish both Flow State and Godless Engineer the best. I wish them and their families the best, but I hope they do a little bit of soul searching and trying to at least be consistent with their own paradigms.